Welcome back. So we have already made our dough and I have let it rise for a few hours. So it has doubled in size, as you can see. So it's nice. It's ready to be rolled out. But before I do that, you can make cinnamon rolls with a lot of different options. I love like a cinnamon pecan roll. So I've gotten about 1.5 cups of pecans here, and I'm just breaking them up into smaller pieces. I'm going to toast them to bring out the flavor. So once I'm done breaking up these pieces here, I have an 1/8 sheet pan here. I'm going to toss them in my handy dandy countertop toaster oven, and I'm going to toast them at 350 degrees for between 5 and 10 minutes, so you have to keep an eye on them. When you toast it, it brings out the flavor, and along with that, the smell. So use your nose. It's very easy to burn. You don't want to burn. So I would say at 5 minutes or so, start checking, and give them a swish in between just to evenly distribute them so not any part of the nuts get darker than any of the other ones. And I have preheated my oven, so I'm going to pop these in. So just my little tray. I broke them up by hand. You can also buy them when they are pre-chopped, or you can just buy them whole and chop them up yourself. So next I want to do the filling. So in my bowl here, I am going to bring out my ingredients. I have a stick of butter, and I'm going to make sure that I save my butter wrapper because I'm going to need it to butter my pan later on. So I'm going to get all of this off of here and then just kind of put this aside, and we'll come back to it in a minute. I want to then add to that about 1 cup of the light brown sugar. I have my sugar here, and remember, when you're measuring out your brown sugar, you want to pack it in. So it's kind of the opposite of what we want to do with flour. And then when you measure that, it should be able to hold its shape once it gets into the bowl. So that's how you know you've done it correctly. So you can see that mine is nice and packed in there. It's holding the shape of the measuring cup. Get that out of the way. And then I'm going to add the most important part for the cinnamon rolls, the cinnamon. So I do have my measuring spoon. So let's see, I wrote myself some cheat sheet notes up here. I need a tablespoon, which I didn't get. Got it. All right, I'm going to add my 1.5 tablespoons. So I don't have a 1/2 tablespoon, so I'm going to eyeball it. Like I said in the other video, the doughs, no two recipes are the same. The filling, I haven't really found recipes that are consistently the same. The frosting, there's a variation you can do as well, depending on what you have or what you like. I like to do a little bit of nutmeg in my baking as well. I'm going to put a little less than a teaspoon in here. I think that just brings out some of the flavor and complements the cinnamon nicely. So I have my hand mixer here, and I'm going to plug that in now. I'm a big fan of my stand mixer because it's hands off and it's easy. So if you have that, by all means, go that route. But I figured, again, trying to make it simple. You can mix it by hand too. But here I go, on low. You want to make sure that your butter is softened. So I took mine out about an hour ahead of time. Oh, and by the way, if you do want to refrigerate that dough overnight, you can. So you can make it a day ahead and then finish baking the next day. If you refrigerate it, just take your dough out about 1/2 hour before you want to roll it out so it comes to room temp. I'm just nicely incorporating my sugar and butter and cinnamon and my nutmeg. And then after I roll out my dough, I'm going to spread this on there and roll it up and cut it and place them in the bowls. Alright, so we are done with that for now. I'm going to set this filling aside. And before I roll out my dough, I want to measure my parchment paper. It's important that you use parchment paper or you butter the pan. I just prefer to use parchment paper because it's easier for me, and I have my handy dandy pencil right here. I store it up in my hairdo. Okay, so I'm going to trace the outside of my pan. I'm going to use my culinary shears to cut that out nicely. Just inside the line, because I traced outside. I want to make sure that it fits. That's one way to do it. Close this. Alright, so now I've got my piece of parchment. And that butter wrapper that I saved from earlier, I'm going to use that and just smear it around the edges of my bowl or my baking dish. Now you can do it, I've seen it in round dishes, I've seen it in square dishes. This is going to make me 12 cinnamon rolls. So I'm going to drop some off for my mother tomorrow for Mother's Day. So I'm going to bake a set now, and then I'm going to leave this at the door for her tomorrow so she can enjoy some breakfast since I can't go cook for her. Alright, I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to set this aside, and now I'm going to roll out my dough. So I have pre-sanitized my counter, so you might want to go ahead and do that again if it's been used since you were last here. I'm going to bring out my dough, and I want to roll this out maybe like a rectangle or a square size, about a foot or so. So I'm going to work it from all angles, trying to work it into a square. It's probably not going to work into a perfect square, and that's okay. We'll get there. It's really hard to try to roll things out in a shape. This here is a French rolling pin that I'm using. The ones at school have those little handles we can hold on to. And they move in the same way. I just kind of prefer this kind from culinary school. I'm going to pick this up. Flip it, just so I allow myself a little bit more room here. You want to just get it to an even thickness and get it as square as you can. So I'm going with my rectangle kind of longer in this way, so when I go to roll this up, I'm going to roll it with the short side and then I'm going to cut it. So I don't want to have more dough on some of my cinnamon rolls than the other. So I'm going to try my hardest here to roll it out evenly. Worst case, if you screw up, roll it in a ball, try it again. You might need to refrigerate it. Sometimes when dough gets too warm, it's a little hard to handle. You'll see when we do the biscuit method next week, when we make the pie dough, we're going to need all of our equipment, our ingredients, to be ice cold. Alright, so now I have my mixture here that I made for my filling, and I find that it's easier to clump it around. Let me check on my nuts while I'm at it. They've been in for a few minutes. I'm going to leave them in there for another couple more. I don't quite smell them yet. But I'm going to spread this, and then I'm going to add my nuts. And I'm going to give my hands a wrench. I'm going to add my nuts in it. Now, those nuts are optional. I just like to have some toasted pecans in mine for some flavor. And I'm gonna come here and spread this guy around. If you have a straight edge spatula, some people like to spread it with that as well. The thing that we call the leveler that we level the flour with, or that some people like to decorate cakes with. So just be patient. You're going to smear it back and forth. We want to get all parts of the dough because remember, we're going to roll this. So these end pieces are still going to be our cinnamon rolls. So we don't want to not have any flavor in that. My filling was like an approximation, so if you find that you've rolled out your rectangle and this just really isn't enough for you, go ahead and like half that and add a little bit more. It's not going to hurt. So much easier when those chefs on TV just pull the finished product right out of their oven, like, oh, here, we already did that step and it's all done. You don't have to sit here and watch me do it as I battle it. But maybe it is good that you sit and watch because then you have a realistic expectation of how long it actually takes to do. I love watching those cooking shows and it just seems like, oh yeah, this takes 30 minutes to make. Not when you're me. Probably not for most of you either. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to grab my nuts with my hot pads. And I'm going to sprinkle those. They do smell nice and fragrant. Toss that over there. I'm just going to work to spread them out a little bit. Remember, getting those edges. Now, if someone in your house that you plan on serving this to has a nut allergy, I wouldn't recommend using the nuts. However, I did hear someone once say, oh, I have a nut allergy, I can't have nutmeg. That's actually not true. Nutmeg is the root of a plant, and it is not related to nuts in whatsoever. So I'm just taking my dough here, and now I'm trying to evenly roll it, and it is rolling pretty easy. Notice I did not flour my counter at all. I didn't need to. There was like a high content of butter in this, so it is not sticking. But I just started at the end closest to me. Now I'm rolling away from me. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to bring it closer, and I just want to pinch the underside of this so that it stays closed for me. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just want to keep it sealed shut there and then make sure my ends are closed and nothing's hanging out. Alright, so I'm happy. This looks, less than 2 feet, but more than 1 foot. So now, the best way to do this is with unflavored dental floss. If you have it on the spool, just take out this much, slide it under, and cut it that way. I don't have it, so I'm going to very carefully, so as not to scratch my countertops, use my serrated knife, the one with the teeth on it, and I'm going to cut it in half. Just saw it back and forth very gently because I don't want to smush. Okay, and I'm going to cut it in half again. I find that when you cut it in half and cut it in half and cut it in half, it's much easier than trying to eyeball getting 12 or so rolls out of this. So I'm going to cut this guy in thirds now. So we went in half, we cut both of the halves in half, and now we're going to cut them in thirds, which will give us, if you've done the math, 12 rolls. And I've been waiting for these babies to eat, so I am going to put these in my oven. Well, I'm making 2 batches, like I said. So I'm going to put my batch in the oven for now. And I'm going to refrigerate the other batch